welcome. This is the open Q&A section today for Leland Long with JavaScript and JSON. After this, Leland is off to go work on his new startup company. We wish him the best with that. Hopefully he will come back and visit us after he's rich and famous. Maybe.
Mostly famous.
Mostly famous. Okay. Margaret, did we get questions for today? Have we been getting questions from people today about that?
No, so I assume that they'll have them. I've asked people to preempt me with questions. If not, then me and Leland get to talk about, I don't know, favorite JavaScript JSON things until like 20 minutes.
Until someone says something, yeah.
Yes.
So Leland, and then that's coming next week, real quick. Nick Hunter, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then the return, you guys have seen, if you've been paying attention, if you've seen anything from Jesse Barnum, 360 Works is busy launching major updates across the board to their products. And so we're going to be spinning different live streams covering different products. I'm going to let you guys go, but I wanted just to brief everyone, let everyone know. And tomorrow's the day off, and we'll get back Monday.
We should be good. People, if you have questions, please ask me them.
JavaScript questions, JSON questions, or you or Leland can just discuss Japanese anime or something, whatever. Well, pick out something.
I'll pick a topic.
Pick a topic.
Okay, everybody. Do we have questions, comments, concerns, things about JSON that you're trying to do, things with JavaScript you're trying to do that you don't know how? Otherwise, Leland, what was your favorite presentation you've had with us so far, since so far no one is talking?
While we're discussing my uber favorite sessions, maybe I can do a screen share that shows a few of these demo files that we've had over the years.
Yeah, there we go.
Or over the weeks.
It feels like years. It's been a long time already.
That's right. So this is the GitHub page. If you haven't found my GitHub page so far, if you go to GitHub and put in /LelandLong, like you see at the top center of your screen, you'll get to this page here. If you go to repositories, you will see a slew of repositories. You won't see everything that I do because some of them that are marked private you won't see, but anything marked public here you'll see. And that includes all of the demo files that we've been sharing over these last few weeks here on the live stream. So feel free to check out any of those demo files that you might have missed, or head on over to fmtraining.com and she probably has them posted somewhere, right?
Yes, they are posted. They're also underneath every YouTube video that we've ever done.
And here on the screen, we also have the list here in FileMaker Pro. I think I loaded up all of the demo files that we've had over the last several weeks.
Looks like it. There's a lot of pages open.
It's amazing, isn't it? I remember creating the first one. Let's see, where is the first one? That's, where is it? Oh, it's JS. I'm looking for the word JavaScript. Couldn't find it.
Oh, hey, before we deep dive the first one, we've got a quick
we got our first question from Stu, right?
Yeah. How do you decide, one, whether or not to use a JavaScript library, and two, the criteria you use to decide which one?
Very good question. Very good question. A lot of you may or may not know that there is a lot of JavaScript libraries out there. If I was to try to go to a common repository of JavaScript libraries, that would be NPM, as in Nancy Paul Mary, or November Papa Motel. Did I get it right? Or it's Mike. Hotel, Motel, yeah. So November Papa Mike, JS.com is a major repository of JavaScript libraries. GitHub is as well, but a lot of times you'll start at NPM looking for something and then end up over at GitHub to figure out how to install it and how to use it. Now, that being said, unfortunately, a lot of the libraries that you'll find out in the wild for JavaScript are going to be meant specifically to install and have inside your code, and that's not an option for FileMaker. So there's probably a little bit of a disconnect there as far as, well, can you just grab anything from NPM and make it work in FileMaker? Well, the short answer is probably not very easily. So let's see, what's another site that's a little bit more friendly? I would have that in my, let's look at the documents for what would be a good library. Let's see, maybe even this one we're in. Let's look in the scripts here in JavaScript. There's a reference video. That's Hello World. Let's go down here to I'm trying to find one of my references because I always try to include references to external sites. Probably would have better luck not looking in the JavaScript demo file, but maybe over in the PDF editor. So if we look at PDF editor's demo file, scripts, and go to one of the first ones like this library, there we go. Okay. So here's a link to the npm.js that we were just at. But here's probably a better one to start your searching for. And so let me copy this, paste it in a browser window. Oh, that's directly to the function. Okay, so let's strip out the function name and go to the root, which is cdn.js. So if I can get Zoom's menu out of my way so I can see what I'm doing, let's go back to this root website. This site is an ultra-fast, reliable, globally accessible content delivery network for open source libraries. Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. JavaScript can be coded in several different places. We're the most interested in FileMaker, right? Well, it started on the web, and it's moved over to other places like Node.js. You might have heard of that. And if you've taken my paid class, React Native, all of those use JavaScript. But those are coding environments where you typically need to install a library, and that means that the files need to reside in a folder structure. And as you know, FileMaker doesn't have access to files from within the web viewer. But if you go back to the good old days of coding JavaScript on the web, you also had the opportunity of, if you look down here at the bottom of this particular link, this is what you would put in your HTML code on your website to include this particular library inside your code. But you'll notice that it's referencing an external source, right? And that you can do in FileMaker as long as you have an internet connection. This will work just fine. You can reference the JavaScript sitting out on a content delivery site like this one that we're looking at here. But what I've tended to do, and you've seen this in several projects, is I've gone to that content delivery and I've looked at the actual library code that it supplies, and that's what we're looking at here, an example of a code library. And what I did is I copied and pasted this and put it into FileMaker. So then it was local. So that's kind of one of the deciding factors as far as which library to use. Kind of depends upon whether or not you can easily use it without installing it on your machine. So that means you need a place like Google or this site, CDN, to host the code for you or the library for you that you can reference in your FileMaker code. So if I go back here, this is a good site to start with. And somewhere in here is the ability to search. Projects website. Yeah, here we go. So you might just come here and say, okay, well, what kind of library are you looking for? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And let's say it's a graph. So let's just type in graph, for instance, and it comes up with a bunch of possibilities. These are all possibilities on this site of libraries that they host. And here's a directed and undirected multi-graph library. I'm not sure what that means. A robust and multi-purpose graph object for JavaScript. Well, if we go take a look at that, here's the options that it gives us. And what we're interested in is one of these library versions is going to be useful for us in FileMaker. Which one? Well, first off, you don't want TypeScript. You don't want all. If you narrow down this list to just JavaScript, that takes a few options out. But you can kind of look at the naming scheme to kind of figure out what they're doing here. Min, I presume, would mean minimal, which means it's going to have the least amount of options and not every option. But you'll notice everything up until this graphology, the link is all the same. So all of these are kind of give you the same result, but some of them have some difference, and I couldn't really tell you really what the difference is. At this point, you use the library and see if it does what you need it to do, and if not, try another one. That's how I would do it if I wasn't sure. Or I might do a Google search as far as what does cjs.js mean versus min. Just kind of do a little research on your own to figure out which one of these might work. They might all work. Once you've gotten to this point and you have access to the library, then you just have to figure out how to use it. And this right here does not show you how to use it. right? This just shows you links to the actual library. So what I would recommend next would be to head over to maybe GitHub on this particular library. So let's click on that link. And again, I haven't pre-looked at this. We're just doing this live on the show, hoping to find an answer to your original question. Here is the GitHub page for that particular library that we found by doing a search for graph. And it led us here. If we scroll down to look at the README, we can start to see and read through it. Look at the, so now see, this installation is to put it on your machine to code with it. And that's not helpful. And this is what, instead of doing this installation, you would include that library on that other page in your web page code as a source of that library, so that you can use it inside, keep it inside the web viewer and use it only inside the web viewer. And then down below, now it starts to show you, okay, oh, here's an example of it. Look at that. Well, that's kind of an example. That looks like that is still, you still have to get that from somewhere. That's not a complete link. It doesn't start with HTTP. So that's if you've done this installation, this is how you could use it in a web page. But again, that's only if it's sitting on the same directory as the web page. That doesn't work in FileMaker. So this is not a real good example. This one isn't either. It is starting to kind of show you the difference between a graph object and a standard library. So at least here in this GitHub README, we're starting to see there might be a difference between the min and the other versions. So that might be useful. We can kind of skip the TypeScript usage, but basically you're just relying on GitHub. This is the library. This is where the author put the library, the entire library. And so look, there's a docs folder. So hopefully, presumably, we can find some documentation in here somewhere that would help guide us into how to use this library once it's installed. So that kind of answers your question as far as, well, how do you go about doing this? What do you look for? Let's see, the original question. Let me zip back up here past all of these helpful links Marge is putting in here. So Stu originally said, how do you decide whether or not to use a JavaScript library? Well, whether or not to even use one would probably be determined, can I do it in FileMaker and can I do it easily? Or is there a problem? I almost think that mostly the question in my mind is, I have a challenge that I want to solve, and with my current FileMaker knowledge, I can't think of how to solve a particular problem in FileMaker. So rather than say, nope, it can't be done, I'll go beyond that and go, well, can it be done in a web viewer? Can it be done in a web viewer and have JavaScript help solve the problem? If the answer is maybe, then maybe that's the beginning of your research to see if there's a library or two or three that could help solve that problem. Your next question, number 2, was the criteria you to decide which JavaScript library, and I think that's pretty much kind of what I've been covering. It's been kind of random. A lot of advice you might get by watching a YouTube video on JavaScript libraries. I was doing that one day. I think it was talking about the 5 JavaScript libraries you've probably never heard of. So that kind of piqued my interest. I watched it, and it pulled me into a thread that I followed and followed that bouncing ball for a while. And pretty soon it was a library that I used. And I don't even remember now which one it was, but it was kind of eye-opening. So it helped me with thousands. Look at this at the top here, 4,500 libraries to pick from. Yeah. That makes it rather difficult to know what's out there and what's useful and what isn't. If there was only 12 libraries out there in existence, we could look at all 12 and determine whether or not we could use any of them and file them in the back of our mind for, oh yeah, if I ever run into that someday, I'll have to remember that this library is available. With 4,400 available, that's not really an option. So mostly it's doing a little bit of research to find out, okay, well, if I want to do this, you might even just let Google be your friend. What's the best graph library in JavaScript? You're going to get a million answers. You're going to get a lot of opinions, but that might help answer your question when you start to look at a few of those to see how they were using it, what it looked like, what their challenges were, how much code was involved to make that graph work. They're going to show you, most likely. So that's kind of the best starting point. The tricky part is just taking something that is out there in the mainstream world relating to JavaScript, like a library, and then figuring out how to use it in FileMaker, right? There's your challenge. So these steps that I just showed you right here is kind of the starting point of how you solve that problem. Now, if you look back at some of these solutions I've created, like this one here for the PDF editor, I grabbed a particular PDF editing library and I brought it in, just like I showed you, copied and pasted it from that one page that was available as a content delivery network. So all of this could be replaced with one line of code referencing that CDN site, right? But then I'm always relying on that site to be there and for this page to always exist and for me to have an internet connection. So if you don't want to worry about that, bring it in locally like I did here. And you probably have all heard a million times why this is split into 19 lines rather than one. And that's because of FileMaker's built-in inherent restriction to 30,000 characters per insert text. And there's a few people out there that have found ways to get around that, and feel free to look into that if you're interested. But this is the way that you can do it without playing any tricks, which is just copying and pasting in sections. Typically, I'll dump the entire thing into a text editor. I'll copy a selection that I hope is 30,000 characters or less. I'll copy it, paste it in here, and when FileMaker says, nope, can't be more than 30,000, I'll go back and make the selection a little smaller and keep doing it until FileMaker says, okay, I'll take it. And I did that 19 times, and there it is. So because this was a simple file, because this was to be used for training for people that don't necessarily know the tricks for how to get this into one line instead of 19, here's the long way to do it because it's guaranteed to work. The other ways, use at your discretion. Your mileage may vary. So I think that answered Stu's question.
Okay, cool. Next question. How do you decide when providing a script parameter to use a JSON object instead of a list of values?
How do you decide? There is no right or wrong answer. They both work. So the decision is totally up to you. Now, when that kind of decision is thrown at me, what's my answer? So we're going to turn this from fact into opinion, right? Because this is just my opinion. You can have your own opinion. My opinion is that how did we start years ago in the FileMaker community in passing parameters to FileMaker scripts? The same way we do today. You're limited to one script parameter. That's where we started, and that's where we still are. FileMaker still does not natively support multi-parameter passing in some sort of nice little UI, like 4 boxes, and each one is a parameter, and you plop in the value for each box. They give you one script parameter, and you can do with it whichever you wish. So as developers, what have we done over the years to get past that? Well, years ago, I remember using a delimiter, like the pipe character. What's the pipe character? It's that straight up and down line above your backward slash, above your return key, over on the far right side of your keyboard. Why did we use a pipe character? There was only one reason, and that was because when we passed strings of data, a lot of times those strings might come in from an outside source, or it might come in from one of our users. And we didn't know what they were using, right? We knew that they would probably use the 26 letters of the alphabet. They would probably use the 10 numeric digits, and they very likely used punctuation, right? So what we needed to do in order for a delimiter to work every single time is you need to find a delimiter that's unique. Something that somebody copies and pastes it in from an email is not going to break your solution, right? A pipe character is pretty unique. It's not guaranteed, but it is pretty unique. So I used a pipe character. So if I wanted to send in 2 parameters into a script, I would put in parameter number 1, a pipe character, and a parameter number 2, and I would pass that in as one value. And then in the script, the subscript that was called, I would parse that out. I would do a pattern count, and I would find where that pipe character was, and I would grab the left side for parameter 1, and I'd grab the right side for parameter 2, right? Everybody's probably seen that before or used it themselves. So that was the first way we solved that problem. The next way that I decided to change things up a bit was I did a lot of iOS programming, and in the Objective-C programming language, it was very common to use objects or variables that were called dictionaries. And dictionaries were simple XML structures. So I got the idea one day, hey, I'm going to pass multiple parameters in FileMaker scripts by using a custom dictionary. And so what did it look like? It looked like HTML. It was an XML scheme. So I would pass in, if you picture XML in your mind or HTML, you have HTML and then you have the /HTML and everything in between that is HTML, right? And inside there you can have a body tag and a / body tag, and that's everything between that is the body. That's what I did for passing multiple parameters now. So that was a change. And again, it was just an opinion. Both the delimiter still work. It still works today. The dictionary parameter passing still works today. What did we do after that? We started doing things like custom functions. Matt Petrowski introduced me to one that I took and ran with, and it's still in a lot of production code, and that's the hashtag or #assign function, custom function. And basically what's happening there is you're passing in, you're using a custom function to generate key value pairs in your parameter, and you can pass in 1 to 1,000,000. And then not the parent, the child subscript that you're passing the parameter to then parses that out with a custom function called #assign, or #assign global, I think is the one for globals. So that was a really nice solution too, still in use today. Nothing breaks. It still works the same way that it always has. That was a different way of passing in multiple parameters. And finally, we have JSON. So that's kind of the newest low-hanging fruit, the eye candy, the new tech that we've all been kind of exploring. And so to use JSON now, it is a nice, easy way to pass multiple parameters. You just pass in a JSON payload with key value pairs, and you can make it as complex as you want it, including arrays. You don't have to just have key value pairs in a single object, right? You can have object within an object within an object and an array within that object. And in the child script, you can easily pull those all out. So those are kind of 4 quick, easy ways of passing multiple script parameters. And whether or not to use JSON is just personal preference. And again, when in your original question, Cameron S., instead of a list of values is that first option I gave you, which is a delimited list, right? I used a pipe character, but a FileMaker built-in list of values is a return delimited list. Every value is separated by a return key, right? So in that case, you were using return as a delimiter. Now, a return delimited list breaks as soon as somebody copies and pastes in an email that has return characters in it. Now you're going to get 4, 5, or 6 values when you were expecting 1. So that's where a return delimited built-in list will start to break. But that's only if you know as the developer that you're going to have a case where somebody might accidentally hit a return character in a field and you're passing in multiple fields, that sort of thing. So that's where a solution like passing JSON values instead might not break, because that might be safe with your return characters, and now nothing breaks. So hopefully, Cameron S., that answers your question.
Cool. Next one. How to avoid a JSON type number changes to English notation? I use get UUID number for primary IDs. A temporary solution I do is to change it to a string before constructing the JSON.
Okay, I think I see that you passed it on in Discord. Let me read that again. I didn't.
No, it's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, how to avoid a JSON type number changes to a different notation. That might be scientific notation. A number changes to scientific notation because the number is so long. That would make sense.
Yeah, that would make more sense in English. Like I automatically lengthen that. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. I use get UID number for primary IDs. The temp solution I do is to change it to a string before constructing the JSON. Okay, so if you're, I suppose just the straight answer to that might cover everything that you were mentioning there is, if your number is going to be potentially very long, like what do they call it? Division that ends up with a repeating, like pi. Pi is a perfect example, right? If you try to pass in pi to 1,000 places, your number functions might crump, or you might get the famous question mark in your field because it's too big to show. There's a variety of problems you could have run into. So if you convert that to a string and limit it to like 100 characters or 20 characters or whatever your precision is on your decimal value, you're pretty much guaranteed to not break anything. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it seems like to convert that number to a string instead is probably going to be the solution to that sort of pain. Hopefully I understood the question correctly.
Yes, and it means engineering notation, which is, I didn't realize. That makes more sense.
I wonder if that's the same thing as scientific notation, which
Engineering
is how
notation or engineering form is also called technical notation as a version of scientific notation. So it's a
version of, okay.
variation.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So again, that should, converting it to a string should solve it. Then you just have to figure out what your precision needs to be. You're just, I think you're talking about just using it for IDs. So at that point, you can just make a hard cutoff. For instance, what's FileMaker's UUID? How many groups in hexadecimal? Is it like 6 groups, 8 groups? You could figure out ahead of time, okay, I'm just gonna cut it off, the UUID, I'm just gonna cut it off at the first 48 digits, for instance. Turn it into a string, and now you're probably guaranteed to not have a problem, rather than passing it as a number. Scott Kane's looking at a little deeper dive at the Kanban board conversion. Yeah.
I'll read that out real fast. When Leland showed his Kanban board, he reviewed converting to a slow FileMaker script to JavaScript that ran much faster. Can you get into that a bit deeper?
We can. We can. Looks like Cameron S. is typing. I was curious to see if the reply was, yes, you answered my question, or no, you missed it. Try again. While he's typing, I will start to bring up the Kanban board. That's one of the few I did not load here. So I will get that loaded here.
Did I load it? I hope so.
Matter of fact, I'll try to be smart and use our dev portal and not the live one. It's always nice not to mess up people in a live environment, isn't it?
What, you mean I shouldn't inflict them with gratuitous suffering?
You said it best. All right. This is probably going to show nothing because this is old data, so I need to back it up a bit. Oh, now we're seeing a little bit. Well, let me back it up a bit. Let's go back, a month or so. See if we get any data. Data is nice to look at rather than blank boxes. I starting to get a little bit of data. I'll go back a little further. All right, that's looking pretty. This could be an in-depth conversation for a while, so let's kind of put it on pause for just a second. What's Lynn and Stu saying here?
Stu is saying thank you very much for everything, but he's got to run and good luck on your new venture.
Okay.
Lynn is saying, what is the best practice for setting the type in JSON set element as far as using either the name JSON string or the number 1? Is there a reason why 1 is better to use?
Well, I'm going to answer this the exact same way that we did with parameter passing. Both work just fine. So it's not a question, it's not a technical question or a performance issue as far as which one to use. It is personal preference. It is your own opinion. So with that disclaimer, I will state my own opinion. I'll stand on my soapbox and proclaim that the correct answer to that is you should always use the full name JSON string. Well, why is that? Why would I choose not to use numbers? Well, the exact same reason why there's a lot of things that I do versus doing it a different way. And the number one reason, if Richard was on here, hopefully he would applaud and pat me on the back. My number one reason is trainability. And here's one thing that's kind of morbid, but it's kind of something to really consider, especially as developers I'm an in-house developer. So I develop things for 150 employees and hundreds of subcontractors. So if you, and on a period of 11 plus years. So stop to think about how complex that system is, how involved it is, how crazy the code is splattered all over the place. And then picture me today being hit by a bus. It's morbid, but stop to think about that. Someone's going to take over my position. Someone's going to need to take over where I left off and to continue with the baton and keep running. The company's not going to fold because I disappear. No, they need to continue. And I made that code for that company. It doesn't belong to me. It's their proprietary code. So what's the answer to this morbid question? Well, the answer is I need to code it in such a way that makes my replacement love me and not hate me. Now, granted, I'm pushing up daisies somewhere so they can hate me all they want, and it ain't going to hurt my feelings. There is that. But as far as the company owning that, it's kind of in the company's best interest to say, Leland, you need to code this in such a way that your replacement will love you and we will not take away all of your accolades after you're not here to accept them anymore because we don't like you anymore because you did awful things. No, that's not what you want. So if this was just me and if this was just my code and if this was my solution and nobody's going to look at it and it's up to me, to answer your question, I can use the number 1. Doesn't hurt a thing. It works. If the only thing I care about is that it works, then the number 1 is shorter and easier to type than JSON string. Granted. But barring that, I think everyone should use the JSON string. Why? Because if you share that code, if somebody asks you a question tomorrow and you say, oh, I have the answer, I wrote a custom function for that, and you show them that custom function, if you're using 1s and 3s and variable names X, Y, and Z and Lynn's favorite variable name, they're not going to understand it. It's not trainable. They're not going to be able to dissect it and learn from it. So if you use JSON string instead, now that makes a lot more sense. So to me, that's kind of the answer to that kind of a highly opinionated question. What's the naming scheme for tables? What's the naming scheme for fields? What's the naming scheme for scripts? I think the answer to that is how easy is it for someone else to look over your shoulder and understand what you're doing, number 1, for the reason I gave in case I get hit by a bus or in case I decide, tomorrow's a really good day to retire. Bye, guys. I'm going to the beach. You don't want those phone calls. We're trying to use your custom function and we don't understand it. So can you please fly back in on your own dime and spend 8 hours to help our developers understand what the heck you wrote? Because it's a mess. That's not the phone call you want while you're on the beach in Tahiti enjoying your retirement. So that's the really long in the tooth answer, Lynn, to that question. And really short and sweet, yeah. Use the name. It's easier to read. It's easier to train. It's a few more characters to type than a 1, granted. So thank you, Lynn. Hopefully, you had a smile out of that one. Stu, thank you for the accolades. Cameron says I answered the question. That's great.
Yes, and then Code to Go has a nifty little quote to remember. Always code as though the person who has to maintain it is an axe-wielding psychopath who knows where you live.
Different way to phrase exactly what I just said, right?
Exactly.
All right. While we have other things pouring in, I think we'll get back to Scott's question here while we're all staring at this Kanban board. What is it? Why is it pretty blue? And what the heck have you done here? So the original challenge, and this kind of actually goes back really nicely to a previous question, which is how do you decide whether to use JavaScript or not and which library to use? So what you're seeing in front of you is a finished solution that currently works. It's currently being used by two different companies and by a lot of staff. And of course, there's things that they would like to change, and that's great. That means there'll be a version 2 eventually. This is version 1, but it's currently in use. Now, right now, you're staring at a dev version, so right now we can mess around with code and we don't hurt a darn thing. But the original problem, let me discuss the original problem first, because I think that's kind of important to help you understand what you're staring at. What you're staring at is a scheduling tool. And what I'll say right up front is that at first glance, this scheduling tool looked like it needed to be a calendar. And so the very first solution I created was a calendar, and it did everything that they wanted it to do, and nobody used it. And they told me, it looks nice. It's a nice theory. Thanks for building it. By the way, we're not going to use it because it's not helpful at all. So that was kind of a bummer. So what they did is they created a spreadsheet, and they used the spreadsheet, and they came up with all kinds of custom ways that they used it. And this right here replaced that spreadsheet. So when you look at this, you'll notice that it's very spreadsheet-like. You have columns and you have rows. And it's built in such a way that the columns and rows met their criteria, and they built it that way specifically. Now let me explain a little bit. These blue columns at the top are dates for 1 week, Monday through Sunday. So you can see the dates. Ignore for now the numbers that look like dates but are not. So just everything in front of the dash should make sense to you. Ignore everything after the dash here in this blue column headers. Okay. These two columns we'll get to in a minute. But going down, those are kind of like you would expect to see in a calendar. Each one of those cells represents something going on for that particular day. Okay. Now what's going on down this left side in the second column? This is a list of people that are doing work. And this group of people going down the screen in that, now the first column, you'll see this separation kind of right here in the middle of blue separation. That is a difference between surface type. Now this deals with flooring. So I believe this top group is soft surface, and this bottom group below this bar is hard surface. So you can't do that in a calendar, right? But you can do it in a spreadsheet, and that's what they've done. So each one of these cells, this cell, for instance, right here that I move my mouse on, hopefully you can see the mouse moving on all the streams going on. This cell represents work that's going to be done on this particular day, the 25th of April, 2023, for this particular person, and that is their, consider it a payroll number. So that's their number, that's their name, and this particular cell contains what they're going to do on this particular day. Okay, so there's one thing listed. Now you'll notice over here there's a lot of single ones, but down here on this example right here, here's one that shows 2 entries for one cell. And so each entry is a separate job. So in this particular day, on this particular person, they're going to do 2 jobs on that day, where this is 1. Now, if I jump to a different location, and I don't think I'll try to struggle with it now to find it, but like this one has, each one of these has 3 jobs on it per day. There were some locations where they needed to show like 20 jobs in a day. So as you can tell, it's rather a challenge to try to fit that much information, for instance, into one cell on a spreadsheet. So that was part of the challenge. You can imagine trying to solve this in FileMaker. This sounds crazy, and we haven't even covered all the fun stuff yet. This is just the basics. So what I did is, if you click on this one particular job right here, you'll get a pop-up card window that FileMaker provides. And you can see the particulars on this single job. A whole bunch of dates, some information, some check marks, right? And that's for a single job, but what happens on a day with 2 jobs? Well, if you click on that, you get a separate card window that shows 2 jobs side by side. Now, if you think about that in FileMaker terms, this is a FileMaker layout. How did I go about doing that? Well, these are all global fields. So this is a set of global fields, this is a set of global fields, and I think they're also repeating, so that this particular field right here would be repeating field 1, and this would be repeating field 2. So you can kind of get an idea of how this layout was built, but this is really a nice user interface for people, right? It's two jobs side by side, that's helpful. Well, what about the 3 jobs down here? Well, that starts to get a little crazy on your screen. That means you're going to show 3 side by side, right? Well, you guessed it correctly. That's exactly what we're doing. But what happens for that column that has 19 in one day? That's just not an option, right? Now you could do things, there's a few possible solutions, right? What I chose to do, I don't think there's any here that have 4 or more. In other words, I could show you right now. But basically I made a sliding panel, and I made a maximum, what's the maximum? I think it can show up to like 9 jobs at a time. And it's just, they can just swipe left and right to switch between the different cards. Right. So that was, again, that's all a FileMaker solution. But what you're staring at right here is a web viewer. Well, not all. Mostly, I don't know, what's fair to say, 80% JavaScript and the rest FileMaker. But all of the UI, or everything you see here, is all JavaScript in a web viewer. Yeah, using plenty of library. I didn't hand draw any of this. So that was kind of the problem. That was how this came about to be solved. But I think to answer one of the questions that we've already had, which is how do you know whether or not to use JavaScript or not? This, I think, is a really good case to say, well, if I wanted to build this in FileMaker, how difficult would it be, especially when you start to see things like one job in a cell versus 2 versus 3. And if you saw the one with 19, what you'll notice is that this entire row just expands to hold more. I don't remember which office it was. Let me see if I can find it, because it really is nice to look at. Nope, it's not. Well, at least we got one with 4 jobs in it, so at least we're making. But you'll notice how this one is tall. This entire row is a little deeper than the row above it. So how would you do that in FileMaker, right? I mean, you run into challenges to where it's just like, I don't know if I can solve this in File. Here's an example of 4, so I can just, there's the first one, there's the second one, third one, fourth one, the next one's not going to show anything. So, I showed a max of 6, not 9. So that was a nice FileMaker solution for how to show more than 3 for sure, but only up to 6. So even for the ones that have 19 in one day, sorry guys, you can only see 6 at a time. But some of these challenges you run into, it's like, how am I going to do this in FileMaker? Well, I don't know if I can. And so that's where you start to look at, well, maybe JavaScript might be the answer. Now, one of the big draws in this particular solution is being able to drag and drop over to other cells, right? So that's something that's not native FileMaker. That's something you can do in a web viewer with, in this case, the Kanban library. That now, as you know, today's versions of FileMaker, if you go to the add-ons, there's a shipping Kanban board right in there. So you can use that, and I looked at it, but it didn't look and feel really what I wanted. So I started looking around at some other Kanban boards, and I found one out there on the interwebs. Matter of fact, I think I found it on Soliant's website. They offered a solution to where you could bring in various add-ons, and one of those was a Kanban board there. And I liked look and feel, so I grabbed their Kanban board, brought it in here, and then just started tweaking the heck out of it. So one of the big challenges with bringing a Kanban board is that I needed this Kanban to look and act like a spreadsheet. What do I mean by that? Every row has to be the same height. And that's not native Kanban, right? They're all varying heights. So that was one of the first challenges I had to solve. And you had to do that by going through the JavaScript code, playing around with the HTML and the CSS, and just playing and tweaking and spending time in there figuring out, because it's somebody else's code, right? So you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know what to change where. Pretty soon I figured out how to change colors and how to get 9 columns on the screen and actually have them be able to move based upon the width up to a minimum, right? So if you had this on a really long screen, it all adapts nicely. So it takes a lot of playing around, and most of all of these changes I'm talking about are all in CSS. And I'm not a CSS expert, so don't let that be a hindrance. You just have to, you find things like column count and you change it. Oh, it worked, right? Column color, oh, I'll try that. And sure enough, all of a sudden I've got it looking the way that I want, and it's a lot of tweaks. Now, there's a lot of extra things thrown in here, and one of them that I think is really fun is preferences per user. So if I just quickly change this to orange, again, the magic of CSS magically changes it all. So everybody can have their own preference as far as color.
You have themes? That's great. I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, this preference thing is absolutely, matter of fact, they can change all of their coding abbreviations like carpet. They can actually put in their own emoji. So every time you see this little green utility truck, that's actually this particular user's, that means carpet to them. Where this one, this star down here, that means wood. So, and all of these are changeable per person. We had this big arm wrestling. You can imagine the conference calls with staff, and you've got everybody but from the CEO all the way down to a layman that's going to be using this every day. And you're like, okay, people, when it comes to encoding, when you see on the screen, what's the most important? What's the first thing you should see? What's the second thing you should see? What's the third thing you should see? And how do you want that encoded? because you can't show all that information in a one-liner, right? So can you imagine the wars, the arm wrestling, the arguments? Oh no, I need to see store number first, not surface. And the other guy's going, that makes no sense. You have to see quantity first and then surface and then store number. I mean, so I made it down here that everybody can pick their own field order.
Oh, how cool is that?
And they can pick their own abbreviations and codings. So that got rid of all the arguments.
That's actually incredibly cool.
Yeah. So stuff like that is just, it's a lot of extra work, but oh my goodness, talk about get rid of pain points. And then you have people that font's too small, I can't see. Well, then come in here and bump up your size. Okay. You'll just see less per cell. Knock yourself out. Have whatever font size you want. So yeah, I mean, there's solutions and there's not, right? So yeah, this became one of my favorite things to build. And then I save those on a per user basis. So every time they come in, they see what they want. No more arguing. Love it.
Legitimately, absolutely fantastic. Any other questions? Or are we good to begin heading towards wrapping up, people? Or do you have something else you'd like to add, Leland?
Well, I think there's a lot more to show on this Kanban board, but I think that gives kind of a nice little introduction to what the problem was, how to solve it, whether or not to use JavaScript. Oh, one of the questions that was asked, I think on that same question, is I mentioned that I did something in JavaScript to speed up the process. And we haven't covered that at all yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
here was the problem. I had built a nice beta of this working scheduling tool, and I was showing it off. Of course, while I'm building it, I'm using test data, right? Oops. The minute you use test data, you think that's just it. All of a sudden, you throw that in a live environment and everything breaks, right? So I'm building this thing with test data. It's working really lovely. It's beautiful. It's doing everything that I want. And I go to show it off, and the day I show it off, you hit refresh. Now watch, I'm going to start counting when I hit this refresh button. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's done. Okay, that's tolerable. When I was doing the demo with live data, 33, 34, 45, 46, 47, it finally loaded. They're all shaking their heads going, we can't use that. We're going to be on a phone with a customer and you want to refresh to wait 45 seconds before we can find out whether or not that day's available. Oh, and they need to see something next week, so you need to push next week and wait another 45 seconds for the darn thing to load. Sorry, thanks for building it. Have a nice day. That's not what they said, luckily. I would have killed them. But that's how I felt when I left the demo because it was completely unusable. It was working just like I had built that calendar many years before. And they're like, okay, yeah, it looks nice. We can't use it. It doesn't give us what we want. Because on a calendar, going down, you don't have rows for people, right? You have rows for weeks. It shows, a full month at a time. And even in week view, it still was not working. So anyways, calendar was not an option. So here I'd done all of this work to build this customized Kanban board for a scheduling solution. And no, it was not going to work. Can't wait 30 to 45 seconds. And even worse on a poor LAN connection, let alone go across the country and have that, the servers in Atlanta and you want to use it in California, have even more latency issues. So anyways, that was disheartening. I went home and that's where I had the epiphany, which was, wait a minute, that stupid Space Invaders game that I built in JavaScript, the way that it worked with JavaScript working on the side, doing stuff, it was the game engine, right? And same thing later for Pac-Man. Pac-Man was, the entire game engine was JavaScript. It was the UI that I was using FileMaker for. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm using FileMaker's web viewer for the UI. Now I've got JavaScript inside of it. I got a Kanban library going on in there, yeah? But what's the business logic? What's populating this? It's FileMaker data, okay? So I need to do a search for a particular week for a particular location. I get back a list of jobs for the week and I have to populate them in these cells, right? So that's the challenge, okay? And that's what I was doing. But if you notice in the top center, I'll hit refresh again. If you notice in the top center, you see a status. And you see the looking for jobs is kind of quick. That was FileMaker's data execute data API. it was quickly finding what I was needing it to find. But you'll notice right after looking, let me hit refresh again. Right after looking for jobs, processing jobs. That processing jobs was taking the bulk of that time, 30 to 45 seconds. Now, what was the processing that was going on? FileMaker's query find request was nice and quick. What's all the processing? Well, here's what that was. All of these cells are created, obviously, in HTML. The HTML has to have the data in specific spots in HTML format, right? It has its own language. So I had to get FileMaker's data into that HTML code for every single one of these cells. That's what the processing was that conversion from FileMaker's data API JSON results to this HTML CSS garbage that has to be built for this entire screen. And of course, the more data you have going down the screen, like we had, what was that? Where did I start? Bakersfield? Nope, that's really short. What was the one with the really long list where we started? I don't even remember now.
Atlanta, maybe? Like Atlanta's a big city.
Yeah, we started with one of the B's. Oh, got a problem on that one. That's funny. Oops, that's what an error looks like. Good thing it's a dev server. So anyways, the longer the list of installers on the left, we had a really long list when we first started, but I don't have it right now. Obviously, the more processing time it took. So the bigger the office, the bigger the problem. So that was just not usable. So when I went home that night and I had the epiphany about that Space Invaders thing, it was like I did all of that business logic of the game over in JavaScript and it was lickety split fast. How about I try to take the processing portion of this challenge that I've already solved in FileMaker. FileMaker Scripts was doing it all. It was doing it beautifully. It was nice and efficient. I had specific loops going on. It was written as efficiently as I could and it was still taking too ready long. But it was all there done in scripts, the whole business logic, all the variable names, the fields to loop through, all of it was built and it was working. All I had to do was convert that to JavaScript, have it work over in JavaScript, take the finalized result, bring it back in here, and that's what we have today. And that turned 45 seconds into 5. So now it's lickety split fast. Well, 5 seconds is fast compared to 45 for sure.
Yes, it is. By far.
So let's see, who asked that original question? That was
Scott Kane.
Scott. So Scott, that's a little bit of a deeper dive. That's probably as far as we'll take it. But you can write a comment on whether or not that totally answered your question or whether you're still scratching your head.
I think that's kind of like our last major question, which I think is a good one to end on personally. We hit 2 o'clock perfectly. What do you use to deploy your file changes? We'll grab this one before we scootle away.
Deploy file changes. So I think you've heard me talking about this being a dev server. That's probably what you're addressing. That is a recent change. For many, many years, I have totally promoted and been guilty of live FileMaker development. And I had my arm twisted and was kind of told, okay, we're going to change whether you like it or not. So we did. We made the jump and we now have production server versus a dev server. And there's some pain points for sure. What do we use? Let's see, what do we use? It's mostly automated. We use Proofgeists. That's the current name, yeah. Yeah, not Geist Interactive, it's Proofgeist. We use their auto solution, OTTO, and their migrator tool that works with OTTO Auto. We use that for deploying every Thursday night at about 10 o'clock at night Eastern.
I think we're good. Yeah, no, generally people are saying thank you very much for doing this series. Thank you very much for coming on for so many weeks in a row. Leland, it has been fantastic. We truly appreciate it. Your training has been stellar and covered a very interesting topic that a lot of FileMaker developers need answers to. So,
thank you for the accolades. That's lovely.
Yeah,
glad it was helpful.
I absolutely think so. We look forward to having you back on one day, but otherwise, we wish you a lot of luck in all your new endeavors.
So before we go, one of the things that Richard, Marge, and I have chatted about for a little while is content. And they've been asking questions of the general audience of, hey, submit further questions and ideas and stuff for further content. And that's kind of what I've been struggling with. However, I think I will leave you with at least 2, maybe 3 ideas that I've had for something in the future. And maybe everybody can just put in their votes for, oh yeah, sounds great, or no, sounds like a yawner, I'll pass, thanks, have a nice day. So the first one of the things we didn't cover, and one of the reasons why we didn't cover this is because I've actually never used it, but I've seen little snippets here and there of a JavaScript option called a data table. People using that in FileMaker. And from what I've seen of it, the little I could tell you about it is it looks like it's FileMaker's portals on steroids. So I haven't had a chance or a reason to use it yet, but if I get the opportunity in the future to at least to create a demo file so that I can learn while I'm building it, then that would be some content that I could bring out on a future possible JavaScript show, would be going through and showing usage of a JavaScript data table. So that's number 1. Scott Kane says buzz. All right.
Buzz
And Kyle says he's got a demo file of data tables he's working on. So yeah, it sounds like, you know, it's a common thread. It's something that's well known out there. It's not hiding under a rock for sure.
always interesting, and always interesting to have people talk about it. Different viewpoints are valuable.
Yeah.
Again, Lynn and Scott both say buzz, and people are agreeing with the buzz, which is the Discord way of saying, hey, we totally want to see this. So
Okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, I don't know exactly how it would work out, but like I already told you off channel, there's a solo board game that I've been playing that I've been really enjoying. Under Falling Skies. Don't know if anybody out there's heard of it. I purchased the board game probably from Amazon. I don't know, it was 20, 25 bucks. Been watching some YouTube channels on solo board games and group board games. But these are not your classic Milton Bradley board games that we used to go to Toys R Us and buy for 10 bucks. No, these are usually starting on Kickstarter. These are games coming out of Germany, which are really high quality, major competition, award-winning type games that basically, if you've grown up playing Monopoly and really, like the rest of the planet, really hate playing Monopoly because of all of its failings, you'll be happy to know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of board games that have been made in the last 5 years and continue, or longer than 5 years. I've only known about them for 5 years. That have been created that are absolutely phenomenal, and there's a variety of different types, styles, looks, and feels. But if you haven't looked at it, play around with YouTube with current board game offerings, and you'll be very surprised. It's a very large following. But I've got one that I grabbed simply from a review. They were claiming it was one of their top, probably their top 5, 10 games of 2022 for playing solo. So I grabbed it, Under Falling Skies, and I agree, it's fantastic, and it looks and feels and reminds you a lot of Space Invaders. Who can't love Space Invaders? You know, the guy that made it in FileMaker. So yeah, it's kind of like, well, I won't even explain it. You'll just have to YouTube it if I've piqued your curiosity at all. But I've thought that would be a really cool game to make in FileMaker.
I think
so I'm teased with that idea. Now, it is also available on what they call free print and play. So there's sites out there of tons of games that you can, for free, download the PDFs, print them out on your printer, either black and white, grayscale, or full color, and with instructions, and you can play for free. You print it yourself, you play it yourself. And a lot of them are solo, if not all of them. So this game originally evidently started there. I think it was made originally by a couple of people in Czechoslovakia, if I remember correctly. And still available today as a free print and play. And they made a full box set. Now, the boxed finished product that I got from Amazon not only has the base game, but it has a whole additional campaign with multiple add-on expansion material that takes the original game and just adds a lot more to it. Has a whole complete theme and story and campaign with it. So I'm kind of thinking of doing just the base game in FileMaker. probably using some JavaScript, maybe even a lot of it. Probably not a lot in the way of animation, but at least have some functionality to where you can actually play this game inside FileMaker, use it as a training and teaching tool. And then within maybe the FileMaker demo file that has this, maybe promote their sale with links to get the full thing. Encourage, yeah, if you like playing this small, slimmed down version of the free print and play, go out and buy the full thing. So that's a second thing that I'm kind of toying with, maybe doing. And last but not least, what was the third one? Do we have any questions and comments while I'm scratching my brain trying to remember? I had 3, but now I'm only thinking of 2.
Just to mention that charts would be fun.
Charts. Well, we did the indicators. Again, I've never had any use for charts myself, and I haven't used it, so I'm a bit of a chart newbie. So I know Lynn has provided some information that she's a pseudo expert on JavaScript charting in FileMaker. I might be mistaking that. Might be, I don't know who it is. I'm thinking of someone in particular, but I could be wrong. Anyways, someone has approached me that may or may not be a pseudo expert and is willing to show some information, share some information with me, but doesn't have any interest in training. So if I end up learning from that person something that I feel like I can train on, that might be a topic that I might delve into. I remember the third thing now. You may or may not have heard of Amazon Web Services. You may or may not have heard of Amazon Web Services Lambda functions. Those are serverless functions, and I program it in that environment with JavaScript. So that's pretty advanced, but I think it would probably be fun to at least find something kind of short and sweet to show the use of JavaScript outside FileMaker, inside Lambda, but then use the functionality that we create in the Lambda function actually in FileMaker as a web service. So
that would be really
kind of
interesting. But
it's a bit advanced, but it's got some. Mostly the struggle for me is, okay, what's a really cool example to demo and to train with? That's usually where I struggle. But I've created a few Lambda functions in the last little while, and they're solving a problem. So I'm thinking, oh, might be trainable. Might be able to turn that into a demo, and so.
No, I think so. I think that we've gotten good feedback on this so far, so I think these are all great options. So, for a distant future when you have free time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Leland. Seriously, thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you. It's been a fun ride.
Yeah, it has been a very fun ride. With that being said, I'm going to run our credits. See you tomorrow. Actually, no, there's nothing tomorrow. Have a great week, everybody.
Cheerio.
See you later. Bye.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.